It was a cold Friday night in Seattle, the kind that made the air sharp and the city glow under wet streets. Emma Davis stood near the tall glass windows of a downtown restaurant, watching rain slide down the surface like silver threads. Inside, laughter echoed. Glasses clinked, and people talked about projects and promotions. It was her husband Michael's company dinner, an event she had agreed to attend, even though she would have preferred to be home under a blanket with a book. Still, she was proud of him. Michael had worked hard all year, and tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Emma had chosen a simple navy blue dress, something elegant but not flashy. She smiled politely when Michael's coworkers introduced themselves and nodded during conversations she barely followed. Michael, meanwhile, was in his element, charming, confident, and full of stories that made everyone laugh. Emma watched him from across the table, admiring his energy, but also feeling slightly distant, as if she were watching him live a part of his life that didn't include her. The dinner stretched on longer than she expected. Richard Thompson, Michael's boss, gave a short speech to thank the team for their dedication. He was a man in his early 50s, tall with silver hair and calm eyes that made people fall silent when he spoke. His words were simple but carried weight, the kind of voice that made people believe in him. Emma had met him a few times before, always from a polite distance. He was respected in the company and well-liked, though there was something reserved about him, like he carried thoughts he never shared. As dessert was served, the sound of rain grew louder against the windows. People began checking their phones, some calling for rides, others waiting for the storm to pass. Michael's phone buzzed just then. He stepped outside to take the call, and when he returned, his expression had changed. "Emma," he said, leaning close, "I need to go check on a site issue. It's urgent. Something about the equipment failing. I'll only be gone for an hour." Emma frowned. In this weather? Can't someone else handle it? He shook his head, already grabbing his coat. "I have to go. I'll call you when I'm done. You can take a cab home, all right?" Before she could reply, another voice joined in, calm and steady. "Don't worry, Emma," said Richard, standing just a few feet away. "I'm heading toward your neighborhood. Let me give you a ride home." Emma hesitated. It felt awkward being alone with her husband's boss, but turning him down would seem impolite, especially after he offered so genuinely. She nodded politely. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That's very kind." As Michael left in a hurry, Emma and Richard waited by the restaurant doors. The rain had turned heavier, drumming against the pavement. Richard opened his umbrella and held it over her as they walked to his car. She noticed how quiet he was. No small talk, no unnecessary words, just simple kindness in his gestures. Inside the car, the heater hummed softly, and the world outside blurred into streaks of light and rain. For a while, neither of them spoke. Emma watched the windshield wipers move back and forth, hypnotic in their rhythm. She wasn't sure what to say. Being in the same space with him felt strange, but not uncomfortable. More like sitting beside a calm stranger you somehow trusted. After a few minutes, Richard finally spoke. "Michael's been doing great work," he said, his tone easy. "He's one of the few people who really cares about what he does." Emma smiled faintly. "He does work hard. Sometimes too hard, I think." Richard nodded, eyes on the road. "Yes, I've noticed that too." There was something about the way he said it that made Emma pause. His voice carried a quiet understanding, not the distant tone of a boss, but of someone who had watched people push themselves too far before. She leaned slightly toward the window, watching the lights of passing cars. "He loves his job," she said. "I just wish we had more time together. Some nights I barely see him." Richard's expression softened. "That's the price of ambition sometimes," he murmured. "But it shouldn't always be." The car grew silent again, filled only by the steady hum of the tires on wet asphalt. Emma thought about her life lately, the quiet dinners alone, the half-finished conversations, the way Michael's side of the bed often stayed cold until late. She didn't blame him. She knew he was doing it for their future. But sometimes she missed the version of him who used to sit beside her on the couch, laughing about silly things. Richard's voice broke through her thoughts. "You remind me of someone," he said thoughtfully. Emma turned to him, curious. "Who?" He gave a small smile. My wife, she used to wait for me like that. Always patient. Always believing my next promotion would finally give us time. It never did. Emma felt a pang in her chest. I'm sorry, she said softly. That must have been hard. He shook his head gently. It taught me a lot. Mostly about what matters when the work is done and everyone goes home. The streetlights flickered across his face as he spoke. And for the first time, Emma noticed how tired he looked. Not just physically, but in a way that came from years of carrying things too heavy to share. She didn't know what to say, but in that quiet car, she felt a strange connection. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just human. To people understanding the same kind of loneliness from different sides of life. When the car finally pulled up outside her apartment, the rain had softened into a light drizzle. Emma reached for the door handle but hesitated. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, she said sincerely, for the ride and for the company. He nodded once. Anytime. And please call me Richard. She smiled politely and stepped out into the damp air. As she walked toward her building, she turned once to see his car still parked by the curb. For a brief second, their eyes met through the rain-splattered window. Then he gave a small, almost invisible nod and drove away. Inside her apartment, Emma stood by the window, still hearing the echo of the rain and the quiet tone of Richard's words. Something about that simple drive home felt heavier than she expected, as if it had opened a window she didn't know existed in her heart. She didn't understand why, but she knew this night would stay with her. And though nothing inappropriate had happened, the feeling it left behind was deep, a reminder of how easily two lonely hearts could recognize each other, even without saying a single wrong word. The sound of rain filled the car, soft and steady, as Richard drove through the glowing Seattle streets. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded over her purse, her mind still running over the evening. She didn't know what to say or how to act around her husband's boss. Yet something about Richard's calm silence made her feel oddly comfortable. As if there was no need to pretend or fill the air with polite talk. The city lights flashed across his face, and the wipers brushed away the rain like a rhythm keeping time with her thoughts. After a few minutes, Richard spoke, his voice low but clear. Michael's lucky, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. He has someone like you by his side. Not many people have that kind of support. Emma looked at him, a little surprised. Oh, I just try to help him where I can, she said. His work takes up so much of his time, and I don't want to make things harder. Richard gave a small nod. I see how hard he works. Sometimes I worry about him. People who push that much forget that the people waiting for them are working hard too. That comment hit deeper than she expected. Emma stared out the window at the wet streets and soft neon signs passing by. No one had ever said that to her before. Not even Michael. Most people just assumed she was fine, that being the supportive wife was easy. But it wasn't. It was lonely sometimes. Nights stretched long when the clock ticked past midnight and the apartment stayed quiet. She didn't want to complain, but hearing someone recognize it made her chest tighten with emotion. She gave a small, sad laugh. I guess I've gotten used to it. It's just part of life now. You learn to fill the empty hours. Richard glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. You shouldn't have to get used to it, he said softly. Life isn't meant to be filled with waiting. His words stayed in the air for a moment. Emma didn't know how to respond. She could feel the weight behind his tone. Not flirtation, not pity, but understanding. It was the kind of voice that came from someone who had lived that same silence before. They drove past a quiet park, the trees glistening with rain. Emma spoke without really thinking. Do you ever get lonely, Richard? He smiled faintly. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. More often than I'd like to admit. The house feels big when no one's in it. She hesitated, then asked, Do you live alone? Yes, he said simply. My wife passed away a few years ago. Cancer. His voice didn't crack. It was too calm, too practiced. As if he'd told the story many times, but the ache never really left. Emma's throat tightened. I'm so sorry, she said softly. He nodded once. Thank you. She was the patient one, always waiting for me to come home from late meetings, always saying it was fine. I didn't realize how much time I'd taken from her until I ran out of time completely. His words felt heavy, like a confession he hadn't planned to share. Emma could see the truth behind them, not regret for the job or success, but regret for everything he'd missed while chasing them. She looked down at her hands, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and reflection. I think Michael's the same way, she said quietly. He doesn't mean to ignore things. He just believes it's all for us. Richard's tone was kind but firm. Then remind him of what he's working for. Sometimes people need to see what they're fighting to protect. Emma nodded slowly. It was strange. She had never imagined having such a deep conversation with Richard. Yet it felt natural. The car felt like a small bubble outside the world, where two people could talk honestly without judgment. As they stopped at a red light, the glow from the signal washed over the car. Richard turned slightly toward her, not with boldness, but with quiet attention. You know, he said, you have this calm about you, the kind that makes people feel steady just by being near you. That's rare. Emma met his eyes for a moment. There was nothing inappropriate there, just warmth and respect. But something in her heart stirred, a soft reminder that she was still visible. Still capable of being seen as more than someone's wife waiting at home. She looked away quickly, her cheeks warming. Thank you, she said softly. That's kind of you, he smiled gently. It's not kindness, just honesty. The light turned green and the car moved forward. For a while, they said nothing. The city's hum faded as they entered quieter streets, the kind lined with tall trees and soft porch lights. Emma realized she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, understood. Not pitied, not admired, but seen for who she really was. She glanced at Richard again. His face looked calm but thoughtful, his hands steady on the steering wheel. There was no tension, no unspoken motive, just quiet presence. And that, somehow, made her heart ache even more. You must miss her, Emma said gently. I do, Richard admitted. But not just her. I miss who I was when she was around. I think we all lose parts of ourselves when life gets busy. You seem to be holding on to yours even if you don't realize it. That made her smile faintly. Some days I'm not sure I am. He shook his head lightly. You are. You showed up tonight even though you probably didn't want to. That's what holding on looks like. His words felt like light rain on her heart, quiet, healing. The rest of the ride passed in soft silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. She could feel the comfort in it, the strange peace of being understood by someone who expected nothing in return. When they turned into her neighborhood, Emma almost wished the drive could last a little longer. It wasn't that she wanted more time with him personally. It was the calm he carried. The way he made space for honesty without judgment. As the car slowed near her building, she found her voice again. You give good advice, she said. Richard smiled faintly. Not advice, he said. Just perspective from a man who's learned a few things too late. The rain eased to a soft drizzle, and the street shimmered under the lights. Emma looked at him one last time before stepping out. There were so many things she could have said about loneliness, about gratitude, but she stayed quiet. Some things didn't need words. As she closed the car door and turned toward her apartment, she felt a mix of emotions she couldn't name. She wasn't in love. She wasn't confused. She was simply awakened, reminded of something she had forgotten inside herself. From the car, Richard watched her walk safely to the entrance, then drove off slowly, his face unreadable but peaceful. For both of them, that short drive home had changed something small but important. It wasn't love or betrayal, it was understanding. Two people lost in different silences had found a moment of truth between them. And as Emma stepped inside her apartment, hearing the last drops of rain fade away, she knew she'd remember that conversation not because of what was said, but because of what it made her feel, seen, heard, and quietly human again. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle when Richard's car stopped in front of Emma's apartment building. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. The hum of the engine, the ticking of the rain on the windshield, the faint music from a passing car. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move right away. She sat there, hands resting on her lap. unsure how to end a ride that had felt more meaningful than she expected. "Thank you for bringing me home," she said finally, turning to him with a polite but genuine smile. "And for listening. I didn't realize I needed to talk until now." Richard looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "people don't need answers. They just need someone to hear them." His voice carried warmth, not the charm of someone trying to impress, but the honesty of someone who understood. The rain ran down the car windows like silver threads, and for a brief second Emma felt suspended in time, as if this small, quiet space was a world apart from everything else. She hesitated. "You mentioned your wife earlier," she said softly. "I hope I didn't make you remember painful things." He shook his head. "No," he said, his tone steady. "Talking about her reminds me that what we shared mattered. That kind of love doesn't fade. It changes shape, that's all." Emma's chest tightened. There was a sadness in his eyes, but also peace, the kind that comes only after accepting life's hardest truths. She found herself wanting to comfort him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said quietly, "She must have been someone very special." "She was," he said, smiling faintly. "She saw people for who they really were." "You have that same way about you?" Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her. She'd been complimented before on her looks, her cooking, her kindness, but this felt different. It wasn't surface level. It felt like he had looked past everything she showed to the world and seen the real her, the part that was often quiet, often overlooked. She looked down, flustered. "That's kind of you to say. It's the truth," he replied simply. For a moment, silence filled the car again. But it wasn't awkward. It was calm, grounding. Emma could feel the warmth from the car's heater and smell the faint scent of rain. Mixed with Richard's cologne, something clean and subtle, like cedarwood. Finally, she reached for the door handle, though part of her didn't want to break the stillness. "Good night, Richard, and thank you again for the ride." Just as she opened the door, he said softly, "Emma." She turned back, and he met her eyes. "You have a rare kind of grace," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Don't let the world dull that." The words hit her like a gentle wave. Not dramatic, not romantic, but sincere. For years, she'd been living in the background of Michael's long work hours. Always the one waiting, supporting, and smiling. She hadn't thought of herself as someone with grace, yet hearing it from him made her see herself differently. Not invisible, but steady, important in quiet ways. She gave a small nod, unable to find the right response. Then she stepped out into the drizzle. The rain was cool against her skin, the air fresh with the scent of wet pavement. Richard waited until she reached the building entrance before he drove away. She stood under the awning, watching his car disappear into the night. The red taillights glowing briefly before vanishing around the corner. Inside her apartment, everything was still. The lamp on the side table cast a soft yellow glow, and the faint ticking of the clock filled the silence. Emma slipped off her shoes and sat on the couch, staring out the window. Her reflection looked back at her, tired but somehow lighter. She thought about Richard's words again. "You have a rare kind of grace." It wasn't a flirtation. It wasn't a hidden message. It was something deeper: recognition. Someone had noticed her quiet strength, her patience, her effort. And that simple acknowledgement made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. She thought about Michael, too. He was a good man, kind, hardworking, loyal, but lately their connection had faded into routine. They barely talked beyond daily tasks and schedules. There was no malice between them, just distance. And tonight, sitting there with the sound of rain still in her ears, Emma realized how much she missed being truly understood. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael, still at the site. "Don't wait up. Love you." She smiled faintly. He meant well. She knew that. But at that moment, she couldn't help feeling that life was quietly moving past them both. Like a train they'd stopped chasing, Emma stood up and walked to the kitchen window. The rain had stopped completely now, and the city looked peaceful under the misty glow of streetlights. She wrapped her arms around herself. thinking of Richard's story, the years he had lost with his wife because of work, the regret hidden beneath his calm words. She didn't want that to be her and Michael someday. It's two people who loved each other but forgot to show it until it was too late. She took a deep breath. Maybe tonight wasn't just about a ride home. Maybe it was a quiet reminder that life was still happening, that love needed time, tension, and care to survive. Hours later, as she lay in bed, she couldn't fall asleep. Her mind replayed the conversation in the car, the tone of his voice, the softness of that final moment. There had been no touch, no wrong intention, only understanding. And yet it had changed something inside her. When morning came, sunlight filtered through the curtains. Emma sat up slowly, feeling different. Not in love with Richard, that wasn't it. But inspired by what he had said, by the truth he'd shared about time, loss, and noticing what really matters. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window again, watching the street below. People were rushing to work, cars passing, life continuing. But inside her heart, there was a quiet resolve. She didn't want to live as a shadow beside her husband's ambition anymore. She wanted to remind him and herself that their marriage was more than routines and responsibilities. That evening, when Michael came home, tired but smiling, Emma greeted him with warmth she hadn't shown in a while. They sat together at the table, eating a simple dinner, talking about small things, their favorite old movies, the trip they never took, how long it had been since they'd just sat like this. Michael noticed her change, her softness, the calm energy around her. Later, as he rested his hand over hers, he said quietly, "You seem different tonight." Emma smiled. "Maybe I just remembered something important." He didn't ask what, and she didn't explain. Some moments didn't need explaining. And though she never told him about the quiet conversation in Richard's car, she carried its meaning in her heart. It wasn't a memory of temptation. It was a turning point. A reminder that sometimes it only takes one honest moment with a stranger to remind you what love is supposed to feel like. Patient, kind, and worth noticing before it's gone. The next morning began quietly. Sunlight slipping through the blinds as Emma poured coffee into 2 mugs. The smell of fresh brew filled the kitchen, warm and comforting. Michael came out of the bedroom looking tired but cheerful. He had worked late into the night after the site issue and was still half asleep, running a hand through his messy hair. "Morning," he said, smiling as he kissed her on the cheek. "Sorry about last night. I hope Richard got you home okay?" Emma nodded. He did. The roads were bad, but he drove carefully. "Yeah, he's a good man," Michael said, sitting down. "He's been a great mentor. I owe him a lot." Emma smiled softly, but didn't say much. She sipped her coffee, watching him from across the table. He was the same man she had married, kind, thoughtful, and responsible. Yet for a long time, she had stopped feeling close to him. Maybe life had gotten too busy. Maybe they both had. But something about last night, about Richard's words, had reminded her that love needed more than loyalty. It needed presence. As the week went on, things seemed to shift quietly in their home. Michael started coming home earlier, helping with dinner, asking about her day instead of checking his phone right away. It wasn't a big change, but it was real. Emma felt him trying, and that effort warmed her heart. Then one Thursday evening, Michael came home with a grin so wide it made her pause. "You won't believe what happened today," he said, waving an envelope in his hand. "Richard called me into his office. He gave me this." Emma's eyes widened as she read the letter. A promotion. Not just a title change, but a real opportunity. Better pay, more responsibility, and, most importantly, fewer late nights. "That's amazing," she said, hugging him. "You deserve it, Michael," he laughed. "I can't believe it. He said I'd earned it, said I've been consistent and reliable. I didn't even know he noticed." Emma's chest tightened with emotion. She thought back to that quiet car ride and realized that Richard had noticed more than just Michael's work. He'd seen the toll it was taking on their marriage, the slow distance, the tired smiles. And instead of speaking about it, he had done something better. He had given them a gift, time. That night, Michael and Emma went out to celebrate. It wasn't fancy, just a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from their apartment. It's the same one where they had gone on their first anniversary. They talked, laughed, and shared stories they hadn't told in years. The spark between them, buried under months of exhaustion, began to glow again. As they walked home later, the city lights reflecting on the wet pavement, Emma felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about loneliness or missed moments. She was thinking about how lucky she was, not just for her husband, but for the small chain of events that had led them here. The next week, she wrote a note, short, sincere, and written in her neat handwriting. Dear Richard, thank you not only for the ride home, but for the kindness you showed me that night. You reminded me that being seen doesn't always mean being desired. Sometimes it means being understood. You helped me remember what truly matters. She sealed the note in a simple envelope and left it on his desk when she visited the office for a team lunch. She didn't expect a reply, and she didn't need one. A few days later, Michael mentioned that Richard was transferring to another branch on the East Coast. He said it's time for a new start, Michael told her. He looked happier than I've seen him in months. Emma smiled gently. He deserves that. Life moved forward. Weeks turned into months. Michael's new role brought balance to their lives. They started taking weekend trips, small drives along the coast, early morning hikes, dinners with friends. It wasn't about luxury. It was about time. Every little thing that used to feel like a burden now felt like a gift. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from their balcony, Michael said quietly, I don't tell you enough, but I see everything you do for us. I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry. Emma looked at him, her eyes soft. You don't need to apologize, she said. We both forgot how to pause. I think we just needed a reminder. He smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Then I'm glad we got one. They sat there in silence, the sky painted in gold and pink. Emma thought about Richard one last time, not with longing, but with gratitude. He had entered her story briefly, not to change its direction, but to help her see what was already there. He had shown her that kindness, when genuine, could heal without crossing lines. That small act, a simple ride home, a few honest words had set something in motion. It had made her reflect, made Michael refocus, and somehow given both of them the courage to rebuild their connection. Months later, Michael received an email from Richard. It was short, congratulating him on a successful project. At the end, Richard added a line that made Emma smile when Michael read it aloud. Keep your priorities where they matter most. Work can wait, love shouldn't. That night, Emma sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street where she had once stood in the rain months ago. Watching Richard's car drive away, she remembered that moment vividly, the silence, the soft drizzle, and his final words. You have a rare kind of grace. Don't let the world dull that. She hadn't realized it then, but that sentence had become a turning point in her life. It had pushed her to value herself again, to speak up, to nurture what she already had. Richard hadn't just been her husband's boss, he had been a messenger of sorts, reminding her that love isn't built on grand gestures, but on small acts of understanding and care. As the night grew darker, Emma closed the curtains and turned off the lights. Michael was already asleep, the calm rise and fall of his breathing steady and familiar. She slipped into bed beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth that had once felt distant. In that quiet moment, she understood the full circle of everything that had happened. What started as an awkward offer for a ride had turned into a lesson about love, presence, and the quiet power of empathy. Sometimes, the most shocking thing someone can do isn't to cross boundaries or confess hidden feelings. It's to show kindness without I sound avowed, expecting anything in return. That was what Richard had done. And because of that, Emma's marriage, her peace, and her heart had found their way back home.